This is the long story of Odysseus, told from the very start. It comes from an old Greek poem called the Odyssey. The poem was passed down by singers long before it was written. People say a poet named Homer shaped it into the form we know. It tells of one man trying to get home from a war. The war was far away, and the way back took him 10 more years. The story begins on a small island in the western sea. The island was called Ithaca, and it was rocky and poor. It had no wide plains and no rich fields for horses. It had goats on the hills and pigs in the oak woods. It had small harbors, hard stone, and a few good springs. The people there lived simply, and they loved the place all the same. Ithaca was ruled by a family that had held it for 3 lives. The oldest of them was Arcesius, and after him came Laertes. Laertes was a strong king in his day, and a fair one. He married a woman named Anticlea, and they had one son. That son was Odysseus, and this is his story. Anticlea was the daughter of a man named Autolycus. Autolycus lived on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, far to the east. He was famous for 2 things, and neither was gentle. He was a great thief, and he was a great swearer of oaths. People said the god Hermes had given him both gifts. When Odysseus was born, Autolycus came to Ithaca to see the child. The old nurse Euryclea set the baby on his knees. She asked him to give the boy a name. Autolycus said he had made many men angry in his long life, so he named the child Odysseus, a name that means a man of trouble. It could mean the one who gives pain, or the one who receives it. Both meanings turned out to be true. Autolycus told them to send the boy to him when he was grown. He promised gifts, and he kept the promise. Years later, Odysseus went to Parnassus to claim them. His uncles took him hunting on the wooded slopes at dawn. The dogs found a wild boar lying deep in a thicket. The boar came out fast, and it struck before the spears did. Its tusk tore a long wound above the young man's knee. Odysseus threw his spear and killed it where it stood. His uncles bound the leg and stopped the blood with a charm. The wound healed, but it left a white scar on his thigh. That scar stayed with him all his life. It would matter more than anyone could have guessed. He came home with the gifts and with the mark. Odysseus grew into a man of medium height and heavy shoulders. He was not the tallest of the Greek lords, and he knew it. Standing still, he did not look like much beside taller men. But when he spoke, people forgot how he looked. His words came steady and thick, like snow falling in winter. He was called the man of many turns and the man of many ways. It meant he could think his way around a problem. It also meant he could lie well when lying served him. He was patient, and he could wait a very long time. He learned to sail, to shoot a bow, and to build with his hands. He built his own bed, his own boat, and later his own raft. He He was practical in a way that many heroes were not. When it was time for him to marry, he looked to the mainland. In Sparta, there lived a girl named Helen, the loveliest in Greece. Kings and princes came from every land to ask for her. There were so many that a quarrel seemed certain. Helen's father, Tyndarus, did not know how to choose without war. Odysseus saw the danger and offered him a plan. He said each suitor should swear a binding oath first. Every man would swear to defend whoever won her. If anyone ever stole Helen away, they would all go and bring her back. Tyndarus liked the plan, and every suitor swore. For his advice, Odysseus asked no gift of gold. He asked for the hand of Tyndarus's niece instead. Her name was Penelope, and she was the daughter of Icarius. Penelope was steady, careful, and very hard to fool. In that, she was well matched with the man she married. Icarius did not want her to leave Sparta at all. He followed the chariot and begged her to stay with him. Odysseus told her to choose freely, and he would not argue. Penelope said nothing, but she drew her veil across her face. Her father understood, and he let her go. They sailed west to Ithaca and lived there quietly. Odysseus built their bedroom with his own hands. An olive tree grew inside the walls of the yard. He cut the trunk to a post and left the roots in the ground. Around that living post, he built the room and the bed. He set the bedpost in stone and inlaid it with gold and silver. Nobody else on the island knew how the bed was made. Only Odysseus, Penelope, and one old servant knew the secret. Then Helen was taken from Sparta by a prince of Troy. His name was Paris, and he sailed away with her across the sea. Menelaus, her husband, called on the old oath. His brother Agamemnon gathered the kings for war. Messengers came to every house that had sworn. When they came to Ithaca, Odysseus did not want to go. A seer named Halitherses had warned him of the cost. He was told that if he sailed, he would come back alone. He was told it would take 20 years. Penelope had just given birth to a son named Telemachus. So Odysseus tried a trick to stay at home. He yoked an ox and a donkey together to a plow. He walked the shore sowing salt into the sand. He acted as if his mind were gone. One of the men who came for him was called Palaemes. Palaemes was clever, and he did not believe the show. He took the baby, Telemachus, and set him down in the furrow. The plow came on, and at the last step, Odysseus turned it aside. A madman would not have swerved, and everyone saw it. So Odysseus gave up the trick and agreed to sail. He never forgave Palaemes for that day. Before leaving, he spoke to Penelope in the courtyard. He told her to care for his father and mother. He told her that if he did not come back, she should wait. She should wait until their son had a beard on his face. After that, he said, she could marry again and leave the house. Then he took her right hand and let it go. He gathered 12 ships and the best men of Ithaca. They rowed out past the harbor mouth and turned east. Penelope watched from the shore until the sails were small. The war at Troy lasted 10 long years. It was fought on a plain below a walled city near the sea. Odysseus was not the strongest fighter in the Greek camp. Achilles was the strongest, and Ajax was the largest, but Odysseus was the one they sent when thinking was needed. He went as a messenger, and he went as a spy. He crossed into the enemy camp at night with Diones. He argued the army back into line when it wanted to sail home. When Achilles was killed, his armor was given to Odysseus. Great Ajax had wanted it, and the loss broke his mind. Ajax killed himself in the night, and that grief never healed. It would meet Odysseus again in a darker place. In the 10th year, the war would not end by fighting. So Odysseus thought of the horse. The Greeks built a huge hollow horse out of pine. They wrote on it that it was a gift for the goddess Athena. Then they burned their camp and sailed out of sight. They hid their ships behind a small island nearby. Inside the horse sat Odysseus and the best of the fighters. The Trojans came out and found the beach empty. They found the horse standing alone on the sand. Some said burn it, and some said drag it inside. A priest named Laocoon threw a spear at its side. Then serpents came out of the sea and killed him and his sons. The Trojans took that as a sign and pulled the horse in. They had to break their own wall to fit it through the gate. That night they feasted and slept, believing the war was over. Helen walked around the horse and called out in the voices of wives. The men inside almost answered, but Odysseus held their mouths shut. When the city was quiet, a man named Sinon lit a signal fire. The ships came back across the dark water. The men climbed down out of the horse and opened the gates. Troy was taken in one night after 10 years of war. The killing that followed went far beyond a battle. The old King Priam was cut down at an altar. Temples were robbed, and people who begged for mercy were not spared. A man called Ajax the Lesser dragged the Princess Cassandra from Athena's shrine. He tore her away while she held the goddess's own statue. Athena had helped the Greeks for 10 years. That night, she turned against them. She went to Zeus and asked for storms on their way home. Poseidon, who shakes the earth and rules the sea, agreed to raise them, so the fleet that had won the war was scattered on the water. Some men drowned, and some were blown to far coasts. Agamemnon reached home and was murdered by his wife and her lover. Menelaus was driven all the way to Egypt and lost 7 years. Ajax, the Lesser, was wrecked on a rock and drowned boasting. And Odysseus, who had thought of the horse, was punished longest of all. 10 years after the war, all the surviving Greeks were home. All except one. Odysseus was still missing, and no one knew where he was. He was alive, but he was held on an island far out in the sea. The island was called Odyssey, and almost no ships passed it. A goddess lived there alone, and her name was Calypso. She had found him half drowned on her shore. She had cared for him, and then she had kept him. 7 years had passed on that island. Calypso wanted him to stay with her forever. She offered to make him deathless, so he would never grow old. Odysseus said no every time she asked. By day he sat on the rocks and looked east across the water. He wept there, and he watched the empty sea. At night, he slept in her cave because there was nowhere else. He wanted his own small, rocky island and his own wife. He would rather die on Ithaca than live young somewhere else. On Olympus, the gods held a council while Poseidon was away. Poseidon had gone south to feast with a people at the edge of the world. Athena saw her chance and spoke to her father Zeus. She asked why Odysseus was forgotten and left to suffer. She said he had always given the gods their proper share. Zeus answered that he had not forgotten the man at all. The trouble was his brother Poseidon, who held an old grudge. Odysseus had blinded Poseidon's son, and the sea god had not let it go. Zeus said the time had come to end it. He would send Hermes to Ogygia with an order to release him. Athena would go down to Ithaca and stir up the sun. The gods agreed, and the long stillness began to break. Athena took the shape of a sea captain named Mens. She came down to Ithaca and stood in the doorway of the house. Inside, the great hall was full of men who did not belong there. They were the suitors, and there were more than 100 of them. They had come from Ithaca and from the islands nearby. They came because a queen without a husband was a prize. If Odysseus was dead, then whoever married Penelope would rule. So they sat in his hall every day and would not leave. They killed his sheep and his pigs and his fat cattle. They drank his wine and made his servants wait on them. They played games on the floor with counters and dice. They listened to a singer named Phemius, who sang because he was made too. Their leader was a hard young man named Antinous. He was the rudest of them and the first to raise a hand. Beside him was Eurymachus, who was smoother and just as false. Eurymachus said kind words to Penelope and plotted behind them. Some of the servants had gone over to the suitors. A goatherd named Melanthius brought them the best animals. A maid named Melantho slept with one of them and mocked her mistress. The house was being eaten alive from the inside. Telemachus sat among them, and he was miserable. He was about 20 now, and he had never seen his father's face. He had grown up hearing that his father was the greatest of men. He had also grown up watching that man's house be robbed. He was too young and too alone to throw them out. He was dreaming of his father when he saw the stranger at the door. He got up at once, Ashamed that a guest had been left standing, he led the stranger to a seat apart from the noise. He gave him food and wine before asking a single question. That is what a good host did, and Telemachus did it well. Then he asked who the guest was and where his ship lay. Athena, as Ments, said she was an old friend of his father. She looked around the crowded hall and asked what feast this was. Telemachus said it was no feast, but a slow robbery. He said his father was gone and probably dead somewhere. He said even his bones had never been found. Athena told him not to speak like that. She said Odysseus was alive, held somewhere across the water. She said he was not a man who stayed trapped for long. Then she gave him 3 plain instructions. First, call the men of Ithaca to an assembly and speak out. Second, tell the suitors to leave the house. Third, take a ship and go looking for news of his father. She said to go to Pylos and ask old Nestor. Then to go to Sparta and ask Menelaus, who came home last. If he learned his father lived, he should wait 1 more year. If he learned he was dead, he should build a tomb and let his mother marry. Then she said something harder. She said he was not a child anymore and should stop acting like one. She reminded him how Orsts had avenged his murdered father. Everyone praised Orsts for it, all across Greece. Telemachus felt the words land like cold water. When the stranger left, she seemed to go out like a bird. Then he knew he had been speaking with a god. Upstairs, Penelope heard the singer telling of the return from Troy. It was the one story she could not bear. She came down and asked Phemius to sing anything else. Telemachus answered her before the singer could. He said the poet was not to blame for what the gods had done. He said many men had failed to come home, not only his father. Then he told his mother to go back to her room and her weaving. He said the speaking in this house would now be his. Penelope went upstairs surprised, and she thought about it a long time. That night, for the first time, her son sounded like a man. In the morning, Telemachus had the heralds call the assembly. No assembly had been held on Ithaca for 20 years. The old men came, leaning on sticks, and the young men came to watch. Telemachus took his father's seat and held his father's staff. He stood up and said the house of Odysseus was being destroyed. He said the suitors ate his herds and would not pay. He said he could not fight 100 men alone. Then he broke down and threw the staff on the ground and wept. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Antinous stood up and blamed Penelope instead. He said the suitors had been waiting for 4 years already. He said she had promised to choose a husband and then cheated. He told the assembly about the shroud. Penelope had said she must first weave a burial cloth for old lairds. She said it would shame her to let him lie without one. So she set up a great loom and worked at it every day. For 3 years she wove, and every night she unpicked her work. The cloth never grew, and no choice was ever made. Then one of her maids told the suitors what she was doing. They caught her at it by torchlight and made her finish the weaving. Antinous said the suitors would not leave until she chose. He said the fault lay with the mother, not with them. Telemachus said he could not throw his own mother out of the house. An old man named Halitherses stood up and warned them. He had read the signs, and he said Odysseus was near. He said blood would be spilled in that hall before long. 2 eagles had flown over the meeting and torn at each other. Eurymachus laughed at the omen and told the old man to go home. He said many birds fly in the sky and mean nothing. The assembly broke up with nothing settled. Telemachus went down to the shore alone. He washed his hands in the gray water and prayed. Athena came to him again, this time as a man named Mentor. She promised him a ship and a crew and a fair wind. She told him to go home and gather grain and wine for the voyage. He went to the storeroom where Eurycleia kept the goods. Eurycleia was the old nurse who had held him as a baby. She had held his father as a baby too. When she heard his plan, she cried and begged him not to go. She said the sea would swallow him and the suitors would be glad. He made her swear to say nothing to his mother for 12 days. Only if Penelope asked directly should she tell her. That night, Athena walked through the town and found the crew. She borrowed a fast ship from a man named Noman. When the suitors had gone to their beds, the boy slipped down to the harbor. They put the mast in place and hauled up the white sail. The wind came from behind, and the water sang along the hull. They poured wine to the gods and sailed all night. Telemachus, who had never left Ithaca, was on the open sea. Behind him, the suitors woke and found the ship gone. Antinous was furious that the boy had dared it. He took 20 men and a fast ship of his own. They rowed to a narrow strait between 2 islands. There they waited in the dark to kill Telemachus. When he came home, Medon, a herald, overheard the plan and told Penelope. She sat down on the floor of her room and could not speak. Her women gathered around her, and she wept for both of them. She had lost a husband, and now her son had gone the same way. She washed and prayed to Athena for his safe return. Then she fell asleep, and a dream came in the shape of her sister. The dream told her the boy was guarded and would come home. She asked the dream about her husband, but it would not answer. Telemachus reached sandy Pylos in the morning. On the beach, the people were making a great sacrifice to Poseidon. 9 groups of 500 men sat along the shore. Telemachus was afraid to walk up and speak to a king. Athena told him to go, and that the words would come. Nestor was the oldest of the men who had fought at Troy. He was a good king and a very long talker. He welcomed them, fed them, and then asked who they were. When Telemachus said his father's name, the old man's face changed. He said he had never seen two men think so alike as Odysseus and himself. Then he told what he knew of the terrible journey home. He told how the Greek lords had quarreled at Troy after the sack. Menelaus wanted to sail at once, and Agamemnon wanted to stay. The army split in half, and half of it sailed away angry. Nestor sailed with the first group and came home safely. He never learned what happened to the ones who stayed. He told how Agamemnon reached home and was killed at his own table. His wife Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus had planned it for years. 7 years later, Agamemnon's son Orsts came back and killed them both. Nestor said this often because he wanted the boy to hear it. He said Menelaus had been blown far south and had only just returned. He told Telemachus to go to Sparta and ask him directly. He gave him a chariot and sent his own son Pisistratus along. They drove east across the plain and slept at a house in Pheræ. On the second evening, they came down into the valley of Sparta. Menelaus was holding a double wedding feast when they arrived. His son and his daughter were both being married that day. A servant asked whether to send the strangers on to another house. Menelaus was angry at the question and told him to bring them in. He said he had been a wanderer himself and knew what it cost. They washed and they ate, and Telemachus stared at the hall. There was gold and amber and silver and ivory on every side. He whispered that the house of Zeus must look like this. Menelaus heard him and answered gently. He said no man could match Zeus, and the wealth had cost him too much. He had gathered it while wandering for 7 years. And while he wandered, his brother had been murdered at home. He said he would give up most of it to have those men back. Then he named one man he missed more than the rest. He said Odysseus had worked harder and suffered more than anyone. He did not know whether he was alive or dead. At that name, Telemachus lifted his cloak to hide his face. Helen came down from her high chamber and saw him at once. She said the young man had the look of Odysseus about him. She said no one had ever resembled another so closely. Pisistratus said she was right and gave the boy's name. Menelaus said the son of his dearest friend was under his roof. Then they all began to weep, and the feast turned to grief. Helen quietly put a drug into the wine bowl. It was a herb from Egypt that eased sorrow for a day. The tears stopped, and they began to tell stories instead. Helen told how Odysseus had entered Troy dressed as a beggar. He had beaten himself with a whip to make the disguise real. He walked through the city, and no one knew him but her. Menelaus told about the wooden horse and the long wait inside. He told how Helen had walked around it, calling in the voices of wives. He said Odysseus had held their mouths shut and saved them all. The stories went late, and then they slept. In the morning, Telemachus asked plainly for news. Menelaus told him what had happened on an island near Egypt. He had been stuck there for 20 days with no wind. The food was running out, and his men were fishing with bent hooks. A sea goddess took pity on him and told him a secret. Her father was Proteus, the old man of the sea. Proteus knew everything, but he would not answer questions willingly. Menelaus had to hide among the seals on the beach at noon. When Proteus lay down to sleep, they seized him and held on. The old man turned into a lion, then a snake, then a leopard. He turned into a boar, then running water, then a tall tree. They held him through all of it until he gave up and spoke. Proteus said the wind was stopped because Menelaus had skipped a sacrifice. Then he told what had become of the other Greek captains. Ajax, the lesser, had drowned after boasting that the sea could not kill him. Poseidon had split the rock he clung to and let him go under. Agamemnon had reached his own land and been killed at dinner. And one man was still alive, held on an island, weeping. That man was Odysseus, kept by the nymph Calypso. He had no ship and no crew and no way to leave. That was the newest word anyone had of him. Telemachus had what he came for. Menelaus wanted to give him horses, but the boy refused politely. Ithaca was all rock, he said, with no room to run horses. So Menelaus gave him a silver mixing bowl instead. And while the boy sat in Sparta, the gods began to move. On Olympus, the council met again about the man on the island. Zeus called Hermes and gave him the message to carry. Hermes tied on his golden sandals and took up his staff. He dropped down through the air and skimmed the waves like a gull. Ogygia lay far out, a green island with a wide cave. Around the cave grew alder, poplar, and sweet cypress. Owls and falcons and sea crows nested in the branches. A vine hung heavy with grapes across the cave mouth. 4 springs ran clear and turned away in 4 directions. Meadows of violet and parsley lay soft all around. Even a god would have stopped to look at it. Calypso was inside at her loom, singing, weaving with a golden shuttle. Odysseus was not there. He was down on the shore, where he always was, looking east. Hermes told Calypso that Zeus commanded the man's release. Calypso was angry, and she said so. She said the gods hated it when a goddess loved a mortal man. She said she had saved him when he came floating on a broken keel. She had loved him and fed him and offered him endless life. But she could not stand against Zeus, and she knew it. She said she had no ship and no crew to send with him. She would tell him how to build his own and let him go. She walked down to the shore and found him weeping. She said the days of grief were over and he could go home. He did not believe her at first and asked her to swear. He thought it might be a trick to get him onto the water. She swore the greatest oath the gods can swear. Then she laughed a little and said his mind never rested. That night they ate together, and she asked him one last time. She said Penelope could not match her in face or in form. Odysseus agreed politely and said he knew it well. He said his wife was mortal and would grow old, but he still wanted his own house and his own land. He said he had suffered much already and could suffer more. In the morning, she gave him a bronze axe and an adze. She showed him a stand of dry timber at the far end of the island. He cut 20 trees and trimmed them straight and true. He drilled them and fitted them and pinned them together. He built a deck and a mast and a steering oar. He wove branches into a wall against the waves. Calypso brought cloth for a sail, and he sewed it himself. In 4 days the raft was finished. On the 5th she washed him, gave him wine and bread and water, and sent him off. She sent a warm, following wind behind him. He sat and steered and did not sleep at all. He kept the great bear on his left hand, as she had told him. For 17 days, he sailed alone across the empty sea. On the 18th day, he saw hills rising out of the water. It was Syria, the land of the Phaeacians, and he was nearly safe. Then Poseidon came back from the far country and saw him. The sea god was furious that the gods had acted while he was away. He gathered the clouds with his hands and stirred up the water. He drove the east wind and the south wind and the north wind together. Night came down over the sea in the middle of the day. A wave broke over the raft and threw Odysseus into the water. The steering oar was torn out of his hands. The mast snapped and the sail went into the sea. He was under a long time before he came up. He caught the wreck and climbed on and held tight. The waves threw the raft from wind to wind like a thistle. A sea goddess named Ino saw him from the water. She had once been a mortal woman before she was changed. She rose beside him and told him to leave the raft. She gave him a veil to tie around his chest. While he wore it, the sea could not drown him. She said to swim for the shore and to throw the veil back after. Odysseus did not trust her either and stayed on the raft. Then a great wave broke the timbers apart like chaff. He got astride one plank as if riding a horse. Then he tied the veil on and left the wreck and swam. For 2 days and 2 nights he swam. On the 3rd morning the wind dropped and he saw land close by, but the coast was all cliffs and there was nowhere to come in. The swell smashed against the rock and drew back hissing. He was thrown against the stone and tore the skin off his hands. He swam out again and worked along the shore. At last he found the mouth of a river running into the sea. He prayed to the river god to let him in. The current stopped, and the water went smooth, and he came ashore. His knees gave way, and his hands hung useless. The sea ran out of his mouth and nose. He lay a long time without moving. Then he threw the veil back into the water, as he had promised. He crawled up the bank away from the cold night wind. He found 2 olive bushes grown together over deep leaves. He dug into the leaves and lay down and covered himself. It was like a farmer burying a coal to save fire for the morning. Athena poured sleep over his eyes and closed them. That night, a king's daughter was dreaming in the town nearby. Her name was Nausicaa, and she was young and unmarried. Athena came into her sleep in the shape of a friend. The dream said her clothes were lying dirty, and her wedding might be near. It said she should ask her father for a wagon and go to the washing pools. In the morning she asked, and she was too shy to say why. Her father Alcinous smiled and gave her the mules and the cart. Her mother Arete packed food and a golden flask of oil. The girls drove down to the river mouth where the pools were clear. They washed the clothes and trod them clean in the water. They spread them on the pebbles by the shore to dry. Then they bathed and rubbed themselves with oil and ate. Afterwards, they took off their veils and played at ball. The ball went wide and fell into the river, and the girls screamed. The noise woke the man asleep under the olive bushes. Odysseus sat up in the leaves and wondered what land he had reached. He broke a leafy branch to hold in front of himself because he was naked. He came out of the bushes caked with salt and dried blood. The girls ran in every direction along the shore. Only Nausicaa stood still, because Athena put courage in her. Odysseus decided not to touch her knees in the usual way of begging. He thought it might frighten her, so he spoke from where he stood. He said he did not know if she was a goddess or a girl. He said if she was mortal, her parents must be glad of her. He said he had come off the sea after 20 days of trouble. He asked only for a rag to wear and the way to the town. Then he wished her a husband and a house and a mind at peace with him. Nausicaa answered that no one came to their land by accident. She said her father was Alcinous, and this was Scheria. She called her women back and told them to stop being foolish. She said a stranger who comes in need comes from Zeus. They gave him clothes and oil and told him to wash in the river. He asked them to stand back while he cleaned the salt off himself. When he came out dressed, Athena made him look taller and stronger. His hair fell in curls like flowers on his shoulders. Nausicaa looked at him and told her women quietly that he was changed. She said she would not mind a man like that staying in the land. Then she gave him careful instructions because she was sensible. She said he must not walk into town beside her cart. People talked, and she did not want to be gossiped about. She told him to wait in a grove outside the walls. When he judged they had reached the palace, he should follow. Inside, he was to walk past her father and go to her mother. He was to sit at Arete's knees and ask her for help. If the queen was on his side, the king would agree. He waited in the grove and prayed to Athena there. The goddess heard him, but did not appear yet because of Poseidon. When he walked into the town, she wrapped him in a mist. No one saw him pass, and no one asked him anything. She met him at the gate in the shape of a little girl with a jug. She showed him the palace and told him about the queen. The house of Alcinous shone like the sun and the moon. The walls were bronze, and the doors were gold, and the posts were silver. Gold and silver dogs stood on both sides of the doorway. In the garden, trees bore fruit all year and never failed. Pears and apples and figs and olives grew in every season. 2 springs ran, one through the garden and one under the yard. Inside, the lords were pouring the last wine of the evening. Odysseus walked through them in the mist and knelt at the queen's knees. Then the mist fell away, and the hall saw a stranger among them. He asked for passage home, and then sat down in the ashes of the hearth. Nobody spoke, because a suppliant in the ashes is a serious thing. An old lord named Echenius told the king to raise the man up. Alcinous took his hand and seated him in his own son's chair. He gave him food and drink and promised him a ship. The lords went home, and the queen was left with the stranger. Arete had recognized the clothes he was wearing. She had made them herself, and she asked him where he got them. Odysseus told her about Ogygia and Calypso and the raft. He told her about the storm and the swim and the river mouth. He told her that her daughter had found him and clothed him. He took care to say that Nausicaa had done nothing wrong. Alcinous said the girl should have brought him home herself. Then he said something bold, half joking. He said he would gladly give such a man his daughter and a house. But if the stranger wanted to leave, no one would hold him. Odysseus said only that he wanted to see his own land again. In the morning, the king called an assembly on the market ground. He told the Phaeacians to fit out a ship and pick 52 young rowers. The Phaeacians were the finest sailors in the world. Their ships needed no steersman and knew every harbor by themselves. They could cross the sea and come back the same day. Then the king held a feast, and the blind singer Demodocus was brought in. The muse had taken his sight and given him song instead. He sang about a quarrel between Odysseus and Achilles at Troy. Odysseus pulled his cloak over his head and wept behind it. Every time the singing stopped, he wiped his face and drank. Only the king noticed, and the king said nothing yet. Alcinous suggested games outside so the guest could see their skill. The young men ran races and wrestled and threw the discus. Then a young man named Euryalus mocked the stranger. He said he looked like a merchant, not an athlete. He said he looked like a man who counted cargo and cheated at it. Odysseus answered coldly that a fine face can hold an empty head. Then he stood up, took the largest discus, and threw it without taking off his cloak. It flew far past every mark on the field. Athena, in the shape of a man, set a stone where it fell. He asked whether anyone would like to try him at anything else. He said he could box, wrestle, run, and use a bow. He said only in running was he past his best now. He said no man at Troy had bettered him with a bow but one. Nobody took up the challenge. Alcinous laughed and said the Phaeacians were dancers, not fighters. He called for the dancing floor to be cleared. Demodocus sang a light song about Ares and Aphrodite caught in a net. The lords laughed, and Euryalus apologized and gave the stranger a sword. Then they brought gifts, a chest of gold and cloth, and Odysseus bathed. Nausicaa was standing by a pillar as he came through. She said quietly that he should remember her when he was home. She said she had saved his life first. He said he would pray to her like a god all his days. At the evening feast, he sent a good piece of meat to the singer. Then he asked Demodocus to sing about the wooden horse. The blind man sang the whole of it, and it was accurate. He sang how the Greeks burned the camp and sailed away, how the Trojans argued around the horse on the beach, how Odysseus and the others sat inside in the dark, how they came out and took the city street by street, and Odysseus wept again, and this time he could not hide it. He wept the way a woman weeps over her husband's body after a lost battle. Alcinous stopped the music and turned to him at last. He asked plainly who he was and where he was from. He asked why the fall of Troy made him cry like a widow, and so, on that night, the stranger gave his name. He said he was Odysseus, son of Laertes, known among men for his tricks. He said his home was Ithaca, a rough island with a mountain called Narrated. He said it was a poor place, but it raised good men, and he loved it. Then he began the long story of what had happened after Troy. He said the wind took him first to Ismarus, the town of the Cicons. He and his men attacked it, because that was the custom after a war. They killed the men and took the women and shared out the goods. Odysseus told his crew to leave quickly with what they had. They would not listen because there was wine on the beach. They killed sheep and cattle and sat down to drink. Meanwhile, the Cicons who lived inland were being called in. At dawn, a much larger force came down on them. The fighting went all morning by the ships. By evening, the Greeks were driven back into the water. 6 men were lost from every ship before they got away. It was the first lesson, and they did not learn it. Zeus then sent the north wind against them. The sails were torn into strips, and the masts were bent. They rowed to land and lay 2 days sick with fear. When they set out again, they nearly reached home. They came around Cape Malea, and Ithaca was almost in sight. Then a current and the north wind took them and pushed them past. For 9 days, they were driven off every chart they knew. On the 10th day, they came to the land of the lotus eaters. The people there ate a flower and nothing else. Odysseus sent 3 men inland to find out who lived there. The lotus eaters did them no harm at all. They simply gave them the flower to taste, and whoever tasted it lost all wish to go home. The men forgot their ships and their families. They wanted only to stay and eat lotus and forget. Odysseus had to drag them back to the water himself. He tied them under the benches while they cried. Then he ordered everyone aboard before anyone else tasted it. They rowed away fast from that soft, dangerous shore. It was the first place that tried to take them without violence. It would not be the last. Next, they came to the land of the Cyclops. The Cyclops were giants with one eye in the middle of the forehead. They planted nothing and plowed nothing. Wheat and vines grew for them without any work. They had no assemblies, no laws, and no ships. Each one lived in his own cave in the hills. Each one ruled his own wife and children and cared nothing for the rest. Off the coast, there was a small wooded island full of wild goats. No one lived there because the Cyclops had no boats. Odysseus brought the ships in at night through a thick mist. In the morning, they hunted goats and ate well. 9 goats went to each ship, and 10 to his own. They looked across the water at the smoke of the mainland. Odysseus decided to go and see what kind of men lived there. He wanted to know if they were wild or if they feared the gods. He also wanted to see if there were gifts to be had. He took 1 ship and 12 of his best men. He carried with him a goatskin of very strong dark wine. A priest of Apollo had given it to him at Ismarus. He had spared that priest and his family, and this was the thanks. The wine was so strong it took 20 parts of water to 1 of wine. They found a great cave near the shore, roofed with laurel. There were pens of stone outside for sheep and goats. Inside there were baskets of cheese and pails of milk and lambs in order. The owner was out with his flocks on the high pasture. The men wanted to take the cheeses and drive off the lambs and go. Odysseus would not do it because he wanted to see the giant. That choice cost 6 lives. In the evening, Polyphemus came home. He carried a load of dry wood and threw it down with a crash. The men ran into the dark corners of the cave. He drove his flocks in and closed the door with a rock. It was a stone so huge that 22 wagons could not move it. He milked the ewes and set the curds to drain. Then he lit the fire and saw the men. He asked who they were and whether they were pirates. Odysseus said they were Greeks coming home from Troy. He said they were the men of Agamemnon, whose fame filled the world. He asked for the gift a host gives a guest, and named Zeus as their protector. Polyphemus laughed and said the Cyclops cared nothing for Zeus. He said they were stronger than the gods. Then he grabbed 2 men, dashed them on the floor, and ate them. He ate them whole, with the bones, like a mountain lion. He drank milk after, and lay down among his sheep. Odysseus thought of stabbing him in the liver as he slept. Then he stopped, because the door stone was too heavy to move. If the giant died, they would all die shut in the cave, so they waited, weeping, for the morning. At dawn, the Cyclops ate 2 more men for breakfast. He drove out his flocks and set the stone back in place. He whistled as he went up the hill, leaving them shut in. All day Odysseus thought, and by evening he had a plan. There was a great pole of green olive wood lying in the pen. It was as thick as the mast of a wide cargo ship. He cut off a length and made his men smooth it. He sharpened one end and hardened it in the fire. Then they hid it under the dung on the floor. 4 men drew lots to help him lift it. That night the giant came back and ate 2 more men. Then Odysseus came forward with a bowl of the dark wine. He said the giant should drink and see what had been in his ship. Polyphemus drank it and asked for more. He drank 3 bowls of unmixed wine, one after another. Then he asked for the stranger's name and promised him a gift. Odysseus said his name was Nobody. He said his father and mother and friends all called him Nobody. The giant said his gift would be to eat Nobody last of all. Then he fell backwards, drunk, and slept with his neck bent over. Wine and pieces of men came out of his mouth. Odysseus put the stake into the fire until it glowed. He held it there until the green wood was ready to burn. Then the 5 of them lifted it and drove it into the eye. Odysseus leaned on the top and turned it like a drill. It was like a shipwright boring a beam with a strap and bit. The eye hissed the way hot iron hisses in cold water. Polyphemus screamed and tore the stake out and threw it away. He called to the other Cyclops who lived in the hills. They came and stood outside the rock and asked what was wrong. They asked if someone was killing him by force or by trickery. He shouted that nobody was killing him by trickery. So they said if nobody was hurting him, it must be a sickness from Zeus. They told him to pray to his father Poseidon and went home. Odysseus laughed to himself at how well the name had worked. In the morning, the blind giant rolled back the stone. He sat in the doorway with his arms out to catch anyone leaving. The sheep would go out, but no man could pass him. Odysseus tied the rams together in 3s with willow twigs. He put a man under the middle ram of every 3. For himself, he took the great ram, the leader of the flock. He got underneath it and held on to the wool with both hands. The flock went out, and the giant felt their backs as they passed. The big ram came last, slow with the weight underneath. Polyphemus stopped it and spoke to it kindly. He asked why his best ram was going out last for the first time. He said it must be grieving for its master's eye. He said he wished it could speak and tell him where nobody was hiding. Then he let it go, and they were out of the cave. Odysseus untied his men, and they drove the sheep down to the ship. They loaded the animals and pushed off and began to row. When they were a shout away from land, Odysseus called back. He told the Cyclops that Zeus had punished him for eating his guests. The giant tore off the top of a hill and threw it at the voice. It landed just beyond the bow, and the backwash drove them ashore again. They pushed off with poles and rowed twice as far out. Then Odysseus wanted to shout again, and his men begged him not to. They pleaded with him to leave it alone and go. He would not listen, and this was his great mistake. He shouted his true name across the water. He told the giant to say that Odysseus of Ithaca had blinded him. He gave his father's name and the name of his island. Polyphemus cried out that a prophecy had warned him of this. A seer had told him long ago that a man named Odysseus would blind him. He had expected a tall, strong man, not a small one with wine. Then he lifted his hands to the sea and prayed to his father. He asked Poseidon that Odysseus should never reach home, or, if he must reach it, that he should come late and alone. He asked that all his men be lost and his ship be gone. He asked that he come home in a stranger's ship and find trouble in his house. Poseidon heard that prayer, and every part of it came true. The giant threw another rock, which fell just behind the stern. They reached the goat island and shared out the sheep. Odysseus was given the great ram as his own portion. He sacrificed it to Zeus, but Zeus did not accept it. They ate and slept and sailed on in the morning, glad and grieving. They came next to a floating island with a wall of bronze around it. It belonged to Aeolus, who kept the winds for Zeus. He lived there with his 6 sons and 6 daughters. His sons had married his daughters, and they all feasted together. Aeolus welcomed Odysseus and kept him a whole month. He asked to hear the whole story of Troy and listened to all of it. When it was time to go, he gave a strange and generous gift. He took a bag made from the hide of a 9-year-old ox. Into it, he shut every wind that could blow them off course. He tied it with a bright silver cord and stowed it in the ship. Then he let the west wind out to carry them home. For 9 days and nights, they sailed with a fair wind. Odysseus held the sheet himself the whole way and would not sleep. On the 10th day, they saw Ithaca ahead of them. They could see men on the shore tending their fires. Then, at last, Odysseus fell asleep, worn out. His men had been watching the bag the whole voyage. They believed it was full of gold and silver from Aeolus. They said the captain always got the gifts, and they got nothing. One of them said they should look inside while he slept. So they untied the silver cord. Every wind burst out at once, and the storm took them. They were driven back across all the water they had crossed. Odysseus woke and thought about throwing himself into the sea. Instead, he covered his head and lay still and endured it. They came back to the island of Aeolus as beggars. Odysseus went up and asked for help a second time. Aeolus jumped up and told him to get out. He said no man so hated by the gods could be helped. He said helping him again would be an offense to heaven. So they rowed away with nothing, and the men's arms grew tired. For 6 days, they rowed with no wind at all. On the 7th, they came to a place called Telepolis. It was the town of the Laestrygonians, and it looked safe. There was a narrow harbor with cliffs on both sides. Inside, the water was flat, and there was no swell at all. 11 ships went straight in and tied up together. Odysseus alone kept his ship outside and moored it to a rock. That habit of caution saved his life again. He sent 3 men up to see who lived in the town. They met a tall girl drawing water at a spring. She was the daughter of the king, and she pointed them to her father's house. Inside, they found the queen, and she was as big as a mountain. She called her husband Antiphates in from the meeting place. He came, and he took one of the 3 and ate him at once. The other 2 ran back down to the water shouting. Antiphates raised the alarm through the town. Thousands of Laestrygonians came to the top of the cliffs. They were not men, but giants, and they carried boulders. They threw the rocks down into the still harbor below. The ships were smashed, and the men were killed in the water. The giants speared them like fish and carried them off to eat. Nothing could be done, because the harbor had only one narrow mouth. Odysseus drew his sword and cut the rope of his own ship. He shouted to his crew to row for their lives. 1 ship escaped, and 11 were destroyed in a few minutes. More than 500 men died in that harbor. They rowed away in silence, glad to live and sick with grief. Now only 1 ship was left of the 12 that had sailed from Troy. They came next to an island called Aea. A goddess lived there whose name was Circe. She was the daughter of the sun god Helios. She knew every herb and every drug that grows. They lay on the beach for 2 days without moving. On the 3rd day, Odysseus climbed a hill to look around. He saw the island was low and flat and ringed by the sea. He saw smoke rising from a house in the middle of the woods. Coming back down, a god sent a great stag across his path. He killed it with 1 spear cast and carried it to the ship. It was so heavy he had to sling it on a rope over his shoulder. The men ate, and it was the first good meal in days. Then he told them there was a house on the island. They wept because they remembered the Cyclops and the giants. He split the crew into 2 groups of 22. He led one, and a man named Eurylochus led the other. They shook lots in a helmet, and the lot of Eurylochus jumped out. So Eurylochus went inland with his men, weeping as they walked. They found the house of Circe in a clearing of the woods. Around it, wolves and lions were wandering. The animals did not attack, but fawned like dogs at a table. They were men she had already changed. Inside, a woman was singing at a great loom. The men called out, and she came and opened the door and asked them in. All of them went except Eurylochus, who suspected a trap. She sat them down and made them a warm drink. It had cheese and barley and honey and wine in it. Into it she stirred a drug that took away memory of home. When they had drunk it, she touched them with her wand. They became pigs, with the heads and voices and bristles of pigs. Their minds stayed the same as before, and that was the cruelty of it. She shut them in the pens and threw them acorns to eat. Eurylochus ran back to the ship and could not speak for crying. When he could talk, he said the others were gone. Odysseus took his sword and his bow and started for the house. Eurylochus begged him to sail away and leave them. Odysseus told him to stay by the ship if he was afraid. On the way, Hermes met him in the shape of a young man. He told him what had happened and what Circe would try. Then he pulled a plant out of the ground and gave it to him. It had a black root and a milk-white flower. The gods called it moly, and it is hard for men to dig. Hermes said the drug would not work while he carried it. He said when Circe struck at him, he should draw his sword and rush her. She would offer to take him to bed, and he should not refuse. But first, he must make her swear a great oath to do him no harm. Odysseus went to the house, and everything happened as Hermes had said. He drank the cup, and nothing changed in him. She touched him with the wand and told him to go to the pens. He drew his sword and went at her as if to kill her. She screamed and fell at his knees and asked who he was. She said no man had ever resisted that drink. She said a prophecy had told her Odysseus would come one day. She swore the oath he asked for, and then she was kind. Her servants washed him and dressed him and set food before him. He would not eat until his men were released. So she went to the pens and rubbed each pig with another drug. The bristles fell away, and they stood up as men again. They were younger and taller and better looking than before. They all wept together, and even Circe was moved. She told them to bring the ship ashore and store the gear in the caves. Eurylochus was against going back and said their captain was reckless. He reminded them of the men lost in the Cyclops cave. Odysseus nearly cut his head off, but the crew held him back. They stayed on that island for 1 whole year. They ate well and drank well, and and the days ran together. At the end of the year, the men came to Odysseus and reminded him of home. He asked Circe to keep her promise and send them on. She said he could not go home yet because he must go somewhere else first. He had to go down to the house of the dead. He had to ask the ghost of the blind prophet Tyreus about his way home. When he heard it, he sat on the bed and cried and did not want to live. Circe told him how to sail there and what to do. She said the north wind would carry the ship by itself. He must cross the river of ocean to a shore of tall poplars and willows. There he must dig a pit and pour offerings for the dead. Milk and honey first, then sweet wine, then water, and white barley over all. Then he must cut the throats of a black ram and a black ewe. The ghosts would gather too, the blood, and he must keep them off with his sword. Only Tyreus could drink first. In the morning they made ready, and one man did not come. His name was Elpenor, the youngest of the crew. He had slept on the roof of Circe's house to be cool. Woken suddenly, he forgot the ladder and stepped off the edge. He broke his neck on the ground, and his ghost went down. In the hurry, nobody noticed, and they sailed without burying him. The ship ran all day with the wind Circe sent. At sunset, they came to the edge of the world. There lay the land of the Cimmerians, wrapped in cloud and mist. The sun never shines on them, not at dawn and not at evening. They beached the ship and walked to the place Circe had described. Odysseus dug the pit and poured the offerings as he was told. He promised the dead a barren cow when he got home. He promised Tyreus his best black ram. Then he cut the throats of the 2 black sheep. The dark blood ran into the pit, and the dead came up out of the ground. They came in crowds, with a strange, thin crying. There were brides and young men, and old people worn out with grief. There were soldiers still wearing their wounds and bloody armor. Odysseus went pale and held them back with his drawn sword. The first ghost to come was Elpenor, still unburied. He begged not to be left on Circe's island without a grave. He asked for his body to be burned and a mound raised over it. He asked that his oar be set up on the mound as a marker. Odysseus promised, and it was later done. Then his own mother Anticlea came up out of the crowd. He had left her alive when he sailed for Troy. He wept to see her there, but he would not let her drink yet. Tyreus came holding a golden staff and knew him at once. He drank the blood, and then he spoke. He said Poseidon was angry because of the blinded eye. He said they could still reach home, but only with hard self-control. They would come to an island called Thrinacia. On it grazed the cattle and sheep of the sun god Helios. If they left the animals alone, they would all get home. If they touched them, the ship would be lost and the crew would die. Odysseus himself might survive, but he would come home late. He he would come in a stranger's ship and alone. He would find proud men eating his goods and courting his wife. He would kill them by trick or in the open. Then Tiresias told him one thing more. After the killing, he must take a well-made oar on his shoulder. He must walk inland, away from the sea, and keep walking. He must go until he came to people who knew nothing of the sea. They would eat food with no salt in it and know no ships. He would know the place when a traveler met him on the road. The traveler would ask why he carried a winnowing fan on his shoulder. There he must plant the oar in the ground. There he must sacrifice a ram, a bull, and a boar to Poseidon. Then he could go home and give the gods their proper offerings. And death would come to him gently, off the sea, in a comfortable old age. His people around him would be prosperous. That was the whole prophecy, and it was the shape of the rest of his life. When Tiresias had gone, Odysseus let his mother come and drink. Then she knew him, and she asked how he had come there alive. He asked her how she had died, and how the house stood. She said his father Laertes was alive, but living rough on a farm. The old man slept with the servants in winter, and on the leaves in summer. She said Penelope was still in the house, waiting, weeping at night. She said Telemachus held the family lands and was respected. Then she said no sickness had killed her. She had died of missing him and of the waiting. Odysseus tried 3 times to put his arms around her. 3 times she went through his hands like a shadow or a dream. He asked if she was only an image sent to hurt him. She said this is what happens to all people when they die. The sinews no longer hold the flesh and the bones together. The fire takes the body, and the spirit flies away like a dream. Then many famous women came up to the pit. There was Tyro and Antiope, and Alcmene, the mother of Heracles. There was Epicast, who married her own son without knowing. There was Leda and Ariadne, and Eriphyle, who sold her husband for gold. After the women came the men who had died at Troy. Agamemnon came and wept when he saw him. He told how he had been killed at a feast in his own house. His wife Clytemnestra and her lover cut him down like an ox at a manger. He said his men were slaughtered around the wine bowls. He heard Cassandra crying as she was killed beside him. He raised his hands as he died, and his wife would not close his eyes. He warned Odysseus never to trust a woman completely. Then he said Penelope was not like that at all. He said she was wise and steady and would not do such a thing. Still, he told him to bring his ship in secretly, not openly. Then Achilles came, with Patroclus and Antilochus and great Ajax. Achilles asked how a living man dared to come down there. Odysseus said he had come for a prophecy, and that his troubles never ended. Then he said Achilles was surely happy, since he ruled among the dead. Achilles told him not to talk lightly about death. He said he would rather be a poor man's hired hand on earth. He would rather work for a landless farmer than be king of all the dead. Then he asked about his son Neoptolemus. Odysseus told him the boy had fought well at Troy and come home safe. Achilles walked away across the field of asphodel, pleased. Ajax stood apart and would not come near. He was still angry about the armor of Achilles. Odysseus had won it in the contest, and Ajax had killed himself over it. Odysseus spoke to him gently and said he was sorry. He said no Greek had been mourned so much except Achilles. Ajax said nothing at all and turned away into the dark. That silence was heavier than any answer. Odysseus saw other things in the shadows there. He saw Minos judging the dead with a golden staff. He saw the hunter Orion driving beasts across a meadow. He saw Tydeus stretched out with vultures. At his liver, he saw Tantalus standing in water he could never drink. The water fell away whenever he bent his head. Fruit hung above him, and the wind took it away when he reached. He saw Sisyphus pushing a stone up a hill forever. Every time it neared the top, it rolled back down. He saw the shape of Heracles with a bow half drawn. Heracles said he too had once served a lesser man and suffered. Then the ghosts came crowding with a great noise. Odysseus grew afraid that a monster's head might be sent up. He went back to the ship and told the men to cast off. The current of the river of ocean carried them out. They came back to Aea and buried Elpenor properly. They burned him, raised a mound, and set his oar on top. Circe came down with food and wine and warned them what came next. She told them about the Sirens first. The Sirens sat in a meadow and sang to passing ships. Around them lay the bones of men, with the skin rotting off. Whoever heard them never went home to his wife and children. She said to stop the men's ears with beeswax. If Odysseus wished to hear it, they must tie him to the mast. If he begged to be freed, they must tie him tighter. Then she said the road split, and he must choose. One way led past the wandering rocks, which crushed every ship but one. The other led through a narrow strait between two dangers. On one side was a cliff with a cave high up in it. In the cave lived Scylla, who had 12 legs and 6 long necks. Each neck had a head with 3 rows of teeth. She fished for dolphins and for men and never missed. On the other side was a low rock with a fig tree on it. Under it, Charybdis swallowed the sea 3 times a day and spat it out. No ship caught in that could be saved by anyone. Circe said to sail close to Scylla and lose 6 men. Losing 6 was better than losing all of them. Odysseus asked if he could fight Scylla, and Circe told him not to be foolish. She said Scylla was deathless and could not be killed. Then she repeated the warning about the cattle of the sun. They set out, and Odysseus told the crew about the Sirens. He did not tell them about Scylla because they would have stopped rowing. He softened the beeswax in the sun and stopped every man's ears. They tied him upright against the mast, with the rope ends around it. The wind dropped, and the sea went flat and still. The Sirens saw the ship and began to sing. They sang that they knew everything that happened at Troy. They sang that they knew everything that happens on the whole earth. They called him by name and said he should stop and listen. Odysseus signaled with his eyebrows to be let loose. 2 men got up and tied him tighter instead. They rowed until the singing was far behind, and then took out the wax. Almost at once they saw smoke and heard a great roaring ahead. The men dropped their oars in fear, and the ship stopped. Odysseus walked along the benches and spoke to each of them. He reminded them they had escaped the Cyclops and would remember this too. He told the steersman to keep clear of the smoke and the boiling water. He said nothing about the cave above them. Then he put on his armor and took 2 spears and stood on the deck. He was watching for Scylla, though Circe had told him it was useless. On one side, Charybdis sucked the water down. The sea inside her showed black sand at the bottom, while every man was staring at that. Scylla struck. She took 6 men off the deck, the strongest of the crew. He saw their hands and feet high above him as they were lifted. They called his name one last time as she carried them up. She ate them at the cave mouth while they screamed. It was the most pitiful thing he saw in all his wandering. Soon after, they came in sight of Thrinacia. Even from the sea, they could hear the cattle lowing and the sheep. Odysseus remembered both warnings and told the men to row past. Eurylochus spoke against him in front of everyone. He said the men were exhausted and it was cruel to sail all night. He said they would land, eat, sleep, and go on in the morning. The whole crew agreed with him, so Odysseus made them swear a solemn oath instead. They swore to touch no cow and no sheep on that island. They went ashore and ate the stores Circe had given them. Then the south wind began to blow, and it did not stop. It blew for a month, and no ship could leave. The food ran out, and the men hunted birds and fish with bent hooks. One day Odysseus went inland to pray for help and fell asleep. While he slept, Eurylochus talked to the others. He said all deaths are hateful, but starving is the worst. He said they should take the best cattle and offer them to the gods. He said if the sun god was angry, he would rather drown quickly. They drove off the cattle and killed them. They had no barley for the offering, so they used oak leaves. They had no wine, so they poured water instead. The skins crawled on the ground, and the meat lowed on the spits. Odysseus woke and smelled the roasting and knew what had happened. It was already done and could not be undone. Helios went to Zeus and demanded payment for his cattle. He said if he did not get it, he would go down and shine among the dead. Zeus promised to smash the ship with a thunderbolt. For 6 days, the men feasted on the sacred cattle. On the 7th, the wind fell, and they put to sea. When the island was out of sight, a black cloud came over the ship. The west wind hit them with a scream and broke the mast backwards. The mast fell and crushed the steersman's skull. Then the lightning struck, and the ship spun and filled with sulfur smoke. The men went into the water and were carried away like seabirds. Odysseus lashed the mast and the keel together with a leather rope. He rode that wreck alone as the storm carried him. The south wind rose and drove him back the way he had come. All night he was carried, and at dawn he came again to Charybdis. She was sucking the water down as he arrived. He jumped and caught the branches of the fig tree above her. He hung there like a bat with nowhere to stand. He waited for hours until she spat the timbers up again. Then he dropped beside them and paddled away with his hands. Zeus did not let Scylla see him pass. For 9 days he was carried along, and on the 10th he came to Ogygia. There Calypso found him, and there he stayed 7 years, and that, he told the Phaeacians, was the end of the story. The hall was silent when he finished. Alcinous said the ship would sail that very night. He asked the lords to bring one more gift each, and they agreed. They loaded the presents under the benches, so nothing was in the way. At sunset, Odysseus went aboard, and they spread a rug and a blanket for him. He lay down and fell into a sleep as deep as death. The rowers struck the water, and the ship ran faster than a hawk. It carried the man who had suffered most, and he never felt the crossing. As the morning star rose, they came to a quiet cove on Ithaca. It was the harbor of the sea god Phorcys, with a cave and an olive tree. They lifted him out, still sleeping, and laid him on the sand. They set his gifts beside him under the olive and rode away. Poseidon saw them and complained to Zeus that he was being mocked. Zeus told him to do as he liked with the ship. So as the Phaeacian vessel came back into its own harbor, he struck it. He turned it to stone with the flat of his hand and rooted it to the sea floor. The people on the shore watched their ship become a rock. Alcinous remembered an old prophecy that this would happen. He told them to stop giving strangers passage, and they sacrificed to Poseidon. That was the last time the Phaeacians carried anyone home. Odysseus woke on the sand of his own island and did not know it. Athena had poured a mist over the land so he would not be recognized. He looked at the harbor and the paths, and thought the Phaeacians had cheated him. He counted his gifts first, to see whether anything was missing. Nothing was missing, and he walked along the shore groaning. Athena came to him in the shape of a young shepherd with a fine cloak. He asked her what country this was. She told him the name of the island and listed its qualities. She said it was rough and narrow, with no wide riding grounds. She said it had rain and grass and good goats and good wine. She said even people in Troy had heard the name of Ithaca. His heart jumped, but he did not show it. He made up a long story about being a cretin who had killed a man. Athena smiled and changed into a tall woman, beautiful and clear-eyed. She said he was the best of men at plans and lies. She said she was the daughter of Zeus and had always stood beside him. She said even here, at home, he could not stop pretending. Then she cleared the mist and showed him the harbor and the cave. He knelt down and kissed the ground of his own country. They hid the treasure deep in the cave and rolled a stone over it. Then they sat under the olive tree and planned the killing of the suitors. Athena told him the truth about his house. She told him about the 108 men eating his goods. She told him Penelope was still promising and still refusing. She told him Telemachus had gone to Sparta and was in danger coming home. Odysseus said he would have died in his own hall like Agamemnon. Then Athena touched him with her wand and changed him. She shriveled the skin on his arms and legs. She took the brown hair off his head and left him bald. She dimmed his eyes and gave him old, torn rags to wear. She hung a filthy deerskin over his shoulders and gave him a stick and a bag. He was an old beggar, and no one would look at him twice. She told him to go first to the hut of the swineherd Eumaeus. Eumaeus had stayed loyal all 20 years. Then she went to Sparta to bring Telemachus home. Odysseus climbed the rough path up to the pig farm. Eumaeus was sitting in the yard, cutting leather for sandals. 4 fierce dogs rushed at the stranger and would have torn him. Odysseus sat down and let his stick fall, which was the right thing. The swineherd ran out and drove them off with stones. He said it would have been a shame on him if a guest were hurt. He took the old man inside and spread brushwood and a goatskin for him. He killed 2 young pigs and roasted them and poured wine. He apologized that he could not offer better meat. He said the fat hogs all went to the men in the great house. He talked about his master, who was gone and probably dead. He said no master would ever treat him so kindly again. Odysseus asked who this master was, as if he did not know. Eumaeus said people came all the time with invented news of him. Wanderers told Penelope whatever she wanted to hear for a meal. He said he no longer believed any of it. Odysseus swore that Odysseus would come home that very year. Eumaeus said he would not take that bet. Then Odysseus told him a long false life story about Crete. He said he had fought at Troy and been shipwrecked and enslaved. He said he had heard of Odysseus alive among a rich people nearby. Eumaeus listened kindly and still did not believe it. That night it turned cold, and Odysseus wanted a cloak. He told a story about a night at Troy when he was cold on watch. In the story, Odysseus had tricked a man out of his cloak for him. Eumaeus laughed and gave the beggar his own spare cloak by the fire. Meanwhile, Athena reached Sparta and woke Telemachus in the night. She told him to go home before the suitors ate everything. She warned him about the ambush waiting in the strait. She told him to sail past it at night and land on the far side of the island. She told him to go first to the swineherd's hut. Menelaus and Helen gave him gifts and sent him off at dawn. As he left, an eagle flew by carrying a white goose. Helen read it as a sign that Odysseus was coming to punish the suitors. On the beach, a runaway seer named Theoclymenus asked for passage. He had killed a man and was fleeing his family. Telemachus took him aboard, and they sailed by night past the ambush. The ship came in at a lonely part of the coast in the morning. Telemachus sent the ship on to town and walked up to the pig farm. The dogs did not bark at him because they knew him. Eumaeus dropped the cup he was holding and ran and kissed him. He said he had thought he would never see him again. The beggar in the corner got up to give the young man his seat. Telemachus told him to sit down and cut fresh meat for everyone. Then he sent Eumaeus to town to tell his mother he was home safe. When they were alone, Athena appeared at the door. Telemachus did not see her, but the dogs did, and they whimpered away. She touched Odysseus with the wand again and made him himself. His skin filled out, his hair came back dark, and he stood upright. He walked back inside in clean clothes, and Telemachus was frightened. He thought a god had come and begged him not to be angry. Odysseus said he was no god, but his father. Telemachus did not believe it and said no man could change like that. Then Odysseus sat down and wept and said he was Odysseus and no other. 20 years of it came out at once. They held each other and cried like birds whose young have been stolen. They would have wept until sunset, but there was work to do. Telemachus asked how they could fight 108 men. He counted them out by island, with their servants and the singer. Odysseus said Athena and Zeus would be enough on their side. Then he gave the plan. Telemachus would go home first and act normally. Odysseus would follow as the beggar and endure whatever they did. Telemachus must not react, no matter how badly his father was treated. At a signal, they would carry the weapons out of the hall. They would leave only 2 swords, 2 spears, and 2 shields hidden nearby. They would tell nobody, not Laertes, not Eumaeus, not even Penelope. In the morning, Telemachus went down to the town. Eurycleia saw him first and cried out and ran to him. Penelope came down from her room and put her arms around him. He told her to go and wash and pray and not to ask questions yet. Theoclymenus, the seer, told her that Odysseus was already in Ithaca. He said he was here and gathering evil for the suitors. Penelope said she wished it were true and did not dare to hope. Later, Eumaeus led the old beggar down the stony road to town. On the way they met Melanthius, the goatherd, driving his best goats. He insulted the beggar and kicked him on the hip as he passed. Odysseus thought about breaking his skull and decided to wait. At the courtyard gate, there was a dog lying on a heap of dung. His name was Argos, and Odysseus had raised him as a puppy. He had left for Troy before ever hunting with him. The dog was old now, full of ticks, and nobody fed him. He was too weak to get up, but he knew the smell. He dropped his ears and wagged his tail with everything he had left. Odysseus turned his face away and wiped off a tear so Eumaeus would not see. He asked casually whether the dog had been a good hunter once. Eumaeus said he had been the fastest and surest in the island. He said the servants neglected him now that the master was gone. Then Argos, having seen Odysseus in the 20th year, died. The beggar went into the hall and sat on the threshold. Telemachus sent him bread and meat and told him to beg from the others. Most of them gave him something out of habit or pity. Antinous refused and mocked Eumaeus for bringing another mouth. Odysseus said a rich man's table could spare a crust. Antinous picked up a footstool and threw it at his right shoulder. It hit him, and he stood as steady as a rock and said nothing. The other suitors thought it was a bad thing to do. They said the gods sometimes walk the earth looking like strangers. Penelope heard about it upstairs and was angry. She sent for the beggar to ask him for news of her husband. He said he would come after dark, when the hall was quiet. Before that, another beggar arrived, a big lazy man called Urus. He told the old man to get off the doorstep, which he thought was his. The suitors were delighted and made a fight of it for sport. Antinous offered a goat's stomach stuffed with fat as the prize. Odysseus made them swear that nobody would help Urus. Then he tucked up his rags and showed his thighs and shoulders. The suitors saw the size of the old man's arms and went quiet. Urus began to shake, and they had to push him forward. Odysseus decided to hit him softly, so as not to be noticed. He hit him under the ear and broke his jaw and knocked him flat. Then he dragged him out by the foot and propped him against the wall. He gave him his stick and told him to sit there and frighten dogs. That evening Penelope came down and stood by a pillar in the light. Athena had made her taller and paler and lovelier while she slept. The suitors all wanted her at once, and their knees went weak. She scolded them for eating a house instead of courting properly. She said suitors were supposed to bring gifts, not take them. Odysseus was pleased because she was getting presents out of them. They sent for gowns and gold chains and earrings, and she took them all. A maid named Melantho told the old beggar to go and sleep elsewhere. He said she would be sorry when the master came home. Eurymachus mocked his bald head and threw a stool at him. It missed and hit a servant, and the wine jug fell over. Telemachus said the wine had gone to their heads and told them to go to bed. When the hall was empty, father and son carried out the weapons. Athena went before them holding a golden lamp so they could see. Telemachus said the walls seemed to be shining with light. His father told him to be quiet and not to ask about it. They stored the shields and spears and helmets in a locked room. Then Telemachus went to bed, and Odysseus waited in the hall. Penelope came down and sat in a chair inlaid with ivory and silver. Melantho insulted the beggar again, and Penelope silenced her hard. She had the old man seated and asked him who he was. He tried to avoid the question and praised her instead. He said her name was known everywhere, like a good king's. She said her beauty had gone with her husband. Then she told him about the shroud and the 3 years of unpicking. She said her parents were pushing her, and her son wanted his house back. She said she could not put off a choice much longer. Then she asked again where he was from. He told the Cretan story once more, and this time he added a detail. He said he had entertained Odysseus in Crete for 12 days. Penelope wept while he spoke, and he watched her weep and did not move. The old story says his eyes stayed as steady as horn or iron. She tested him and asked what her husband had been wearing. He described a purple wool cloak with a golden brooch. On the brooch, a dog held a struggling fawn in its front paws. He described the tunic, thin and shining like the skin of an onion. He said women used to stare at it. Penelope broke down because these were her own gifts, given by her own hands. Then he swore that Odysseus was alive and near. He said he was already in Ithaca and would come this very month. She said she wished it, but she did not expect it. Then she called for the old nurse to wash the stranger's feet. She said an old servant should tend an old guest. Eurycleia came, saying the beggar looked like her master in build and voice. She brought the basin and mixed the cold and the hot water. Odysseus suddenly turned away from the fire into the shadow. He had remembered the scar on his thigh, but her hands found it at once, as they had known it for 50 years. The old woman dropped his foot, and the basin went over with a clang. Her eyes filled, and her throat closed, and she touched his chin. She said he was Odysseus, and she had not known her own child. He caught her by the throat with one hand and pulled her close. He said she would destroy him if she said a word. He told her to be silent, or he would not spare her when the killing came. She promised, and said she would be as hard as stone. Athena had turned Penelope's mind aside so that she saw none of it. Then Penelope told the beggar a dream. She said 20 geese fed on grain in her house, and she liked watching them. A great eagle came down and broke all their necks and left them dead. She wept for the geese in the dream. Then the eagle came back and spoke with a human voice. It said it was her husband, and the geese were the suitors. She said she did not trust dreams, because some come through a gate of ivory and lie. Only the dreams that come through the gate of horn come true. The beggar told her the dream needed no explaining. Then she said she had decided on a contest. Odysseus had owned a great bow given him long ago by a friend named Ithaca. He never took it to try, and it had hung in the storeroom for 20 years. He used to set up 12 axe heads in a line and shoot an arrow through them all. She would ask the suitors to string that bow and do the same. Whoever could do it, she would marry and leave this house forever. The beggar told her to hold the contest without delay. He said Odysseus would be there before any of them could string it. That night he lay on an ox hide in the porch and could not sleep. He heard the maids laughing as they went out to the suitors. He wanted to kill them there, and he told his own heart to endure. He said it had endured worse in the cave of the Cyclops. Athena came and told him to sleep and closed his eyes. In the morning, there were signs everywhere. A servant grinding grain prayed aloud that this be the suitor's last meal. Zeus thundered from a clear sky. Telemachus dreamed and woke calm. The suitors gathered to feast, and Athena kept them insulting the beggar. One of them threw a cow's foot at his head, and he ducked it. Then the seer Theoclymenus saw the room change. He said the walls were running with blood, and the porch was full of ghosts. He said the sun had gone out of the sky. They laughed at him and said the old man was mad. He walked out of the house, and he was the only one who left alive. Then Penelope brought the bow down from the storeroom. She wept over it before she carried it in. She set out the 12 axe heads in a straight line in the trench. Telemachus tried the bow first and almost strung it on the 4th attempt. His father caught his eye and shook his head, and the boy set it down. One by one, the suitors tried and failed. They warmed the wood at the fire and greased it with fat. Antinous said they should stop for the day and try again tomorrow. While that was happening, Odysseus went out to the yard. He found Eumaeus the swineherd and Philodius the cowherd. He asked them what they would do if their master came back. Both said they would fight beside him gladly, so he showed them the scar, and they wept and kissed his hands. He told them what to do: bar the doors and let no one out. He came back in and asked to try the bow himself. The suitors were furious that a beggar would touch it. Penelope said he should have his turn and promised him gifts. Telemachus told his mother to go up to her room, and she went. Eumaeus carried the bow down the hall while they shouted at him. Euryclea locked the women in the far building. Philodius tied the courtyard gate shut with a ship's rope. Odysseus turned the bow over in his hands, the way a musician checks a lyre. Then he strung it without standing up and plucked the string. It sang like a swallow, and the men in the room went pale. Zeus thundered outside. He took one arrow, laid it on the bridge of the bow, and shot sitting down. The arrow went through every one of the 12 axe heads and out the other side. He told Telemachus the guest in his house had not shamed him. Then he nodded, and the boy took a sword and a spear and stood beside him. Odysseus threw off his rags and jumped onto the great threshold. He poured the arrows out at his feet. He said the contest was over, and now he would try another mark. He shot Antinous through the throat as he lifted a golden cup. The cup fell, the table went over, and the food scattered on the floor. The others shouted that he had killed the best young man in Ithaca. They still thought it was an accident and threatened him for it. Then he told them who he was. He said he was Odysseus, home at last, and that their day had come. Eurymachus tried to talk and blamed everything on the dead Antinous. He offered to pay back everything they had eaten with interest. Odysseus said he would not stop for all their father's wealth. Eurymachus drew his sword and charged, and an arrow took him in the chest. Amphinomus, the only decent one among them, was killed by Telemachus. The boy ran for the storeroom and brought back armor for the 4 of them. Melanthius, the goatherd, found another way in and armed the suitors. He was caught on his second trip and hung up by a rope from a beam. Athena appeared in the shape of Mentor and encouraged them. Then she went up and perched on a roof beam in the shape of a swallow. The suitors threw their spears in volleys, and she turned them aside. The 4 men in the doorway killed them a few at a time. The floor grew slippery, and the room smelled of blood. The singer Phemius begged for his life at the knees of Odysseus. Telemachus said the man had only sung because he was forced to. The herald Medon was found hiding under a chair in an ox hide. Both were spared and sent out to sit in the yard. When it was over, Odysseus stood among the bodies like a lion after a kill. He was covered in blood and dust, and Telemachus fetched the nurse. Euryclea began to cry out in triumph over the dead. He stopped her and said it was not right to gloat over killed men. Then he asked which of the 50 women in the house had been disloyal. She named 12. Those 12 were made to carry the bodies out and clean the hall. Then Telemachus hanged them in the courtyard, and Melanthius was killed. Afterwards, they burned sulfur in the hall to purify it. The rest of the women came in with torches and wept and held their master. Only then did Eurycleia go upstairs to wake Penelope. She said Odysseus was home and the suitors were dead. Penelope said the gods had made the old woman mad. She came down anyway and sat opposite him by the fire. For a long time she said nothing and looked at his face. Telemachus said her heart was harder than a stone. Odysseus told him to leave it because she would test him her own way. Then he went to bathe, and Athena made him tall and handsome again. He came back and sat down and said she was a strange woman. He asked the nurse to make him a bed anywhere, since his wife had iron in her. Penelope said quietly that the bed should be moved out of the bedroom for him. She told Eurycleia to carry the strong bed outside and make it up. Odysseus stood up angry and asked who had cut his bed loose. He said he had built it himself around a living olive tree. He said its post was a rooted trunk, and no man could move it without an axe. He described the whole thing, the stone base, the gold and silver inlay. Then Penelope's knees gave way, and she ran and put her arms around his neck. She said she had been afraid of a stranger with a good story. She said Helen would never have gone wrong if she had been more careful. He wept holding her, and the old poem says it was like land seen by drowning men. Athena held the night back so the dawn would come late. They lay together and told each other everything. He told her about the Cyclops and Circe and the underworld and Calypso. He told her the last part of the prophecy too, about the oar. He warned her that his wandering was not entirely finished. Then they slept. In the morning, he took his son and the two herdsmen out of town. He went to the farm where his father Laertes lived. The old man was working alone in the vineyard in a patched tunic. He was digging around a vine with leather leggings against the thorns. Odysseus watched him a while and cried behind a tree. Then, because he could not stop himself, he tested even his father. He pretended to be a stranger asking after a man he had hosted. Laertes poured dust over his own gray head and wept. Then Odysseus told him the truth and showed him the scar. He also named the trees his father had given him as a boy. 13 pear trees, 10 apple trees, 40 figs, and rows of vines. The old man's knees failed, and his son held him up. They washed him and dressed him, and Athena made him straighter and stronger. Laertes said he wished he had his old strength to fight beside them. He got his wish that afternoon. The news of the killing had gone around the island. The families of the suitors gathered and buried their dead. Eupeithes, the father of Antinous, called for revenge. Halitherses stood up again and told them it was their own fault. He said they had let their sons rob a house for years and done nothing. Half the crowd listened, and half took up arms and marched to the farm. The two sides met, and Athena put strength into old lairds. He threw the first spear and killed Eupithes through the helmet. Odysseus and Telemachus went at them and would have killed them all. Then Athena shouted with a great voice and told them to stop. The Ithacans dropped their weapons and turned to run for the town. Odysseus went after them anyway, and Zeus threw a thunderbolt at her feet. Athena told him to stop in case Zeus grew angry with him. He obeyed, and he was glad to obey. Then the goddess made peace between them, still in the shape of Mentor. Both sides swore oaths, and the killing on Ithaca ended there. That is where the poem stops. But the old stories did not stop there because of the oar. Odysseus still had to do what Tiresias had told him in the dark. So after a time, he took a shaped oar on his shoulder and walked inland. He went east through the mountains, away from every harbor. He walked until the smell of salt was gone from the air. He walked through country where the people had never seen a ship. At last, a traveler on the road stopped him and asked a question. The man asked why he was carrying a winnowing fan so far from any threshing floor. That was the sign, and Odysseus knew it. He planted the oar in the ground there, in a land with no sea. He sacrificed a ram, a bull, and a boar to Poseidon. And the long anger of the sea god was finally put down. Then he walked home to Ithaca and made his offerings to all the gods in turn. The rest of his life was quieter than the middle of it. He ruled his island, and the land came back, and the herds grew again. Later poets told what came after, in a lost poem called the Telegony. It said Circe had borne Odysseus a son on her island, named Telegonus. The boy grew up not knowing his father, and went to sea to look for him. A storm drove him to Ithaca, and he did not know what land he had struck. His men began taking cattle off the shore. As raiders did, Odysseus came down with Telemachus to drive the raiders off. In the fighting, Telegonus threw a spear tipped with the spine of a stingray. It struck his father, and Odysseus fell. Only as he was dying did the young man learn whose son he was. So death came to him off the sea, as the prophet had said. The words had always been able to mean two things. They had meant far from the sea, and they had meant out of the sea. Tiresias had told the truth, and nobody had understood it until the end. Telegonus and Telemachus carried the body to the island of Circe. They buried him there, and the story closes with the two half-brothers together. That is the whole lore of Odysseus, as the Greeks told it. A small island, a long war, and 10 more years of water. A man who was not the strongest, and who came home anyway. A wife who outweighed 100 men with a loom and a lie. A son who grew up on stories and turned out to be real. An old dog, an old nurse, and a bed built around a living tree. The Greeks kept telling it for 3,000 years, and it is still being told.